zu kommen. So, jetzt bin ich sehr, sehr glücklich, den nächsten Referenten ansagen zu können. Das ist Professor Fedor Nicolai Kozyrev, der gestern schon der Mittelpunkt des Kozyrev-Symposiums gewesen ist. Sein Vater ist ein sehr berühmter Astrophysiker in Russland gewesen, aber er ist seines Zeichens selber Professor für Theologie und Biologie. Professor Kozyrev, is this right? You are a biologist and theologian?
Not exactly a theologian, but more a specialist in religious education.
Excuse me?
A specialist in religious education.
Religious education, ja. Also sein Spezialgebiet ist Religionspädagogik und in unseren persönlichen Gesprächen vor einigen Jahren hat er mich sehr von seinen Ansätzen im Bereich Spiritualität oder spirituelle Ausbildung und religiöse Ausbildung begeistern können. Deswegen freue ich mich sehr auf den Vortrag zum Thema universelle Spiritualität und Wissenschaft, Ausrufezeichen, Fragezeichen. Also, Professor Kozyrev.
Danke. Dear participants, I first need to apologize twice. First, that I don't speak German, and second, that my title of presentation slightly changed. Maybe slightly, maybe considerably, because the word universelle goes here. It changes its place. I'm going to talk about spirituality and universal science, and I will explain this. There was a great German philosopher, Wilhelm Dilthey, who drew a very useful distinction between Naturwissenschaft and Geistwissenschaft. And the main criteria for dividing two was the matter of universality. So in Dilthey's view, natural sciences are different from humanities in the sense that they are not only objective, but they are universal, because they deal with the experience common for all humanity. And it is not very much so with the humanities, in Dilthey's view. Humanities are the branch of science or another science. And the main idea of Dilthey was the advocation of the humanities as an equal to natural sciences. He told about them as about little sisters who were offended by elder sisters, natural sciences. And he stated that humanities have their own method, their own methodology, which is different from the method of natural sciences. And these differences are generated by the fact that in order to understand the products or the life of human spirit, it is necessary to be involved in what is called the language game, the famous expression by Wittgenstein. And this involvement in a language game makes the humanities different in different cultures. So many proponents of Dilthey's view use as a synonym of Geistwissenschaft, Kulturwissenschaft. So if the truths of natural science is universal, the truths of humanities can be understood within a certain system of meanings, which are, in a very wide sense, the language game. And here is the main problem with the universal spirituality. One of the great Russian religious philosophers, the founder of the tradition of religious philosophy in Russia, Vladimir Solovyov, who was very fond of universalizing, like many Russians, you know, Lev Tolstoy and Nikolai Rerich. They were very active in trying to deal with the universal spirituality. But Solovyov developed an idea of two ways toward this spirituality. One way is the way of minimalization, and it is a bad way. And another is the way of maximalization. And the second way means that in order to understand spirituality of the others, it is necessary to be deeply involved in their language game. And the possibility of that is quite limited for a person. The Dilthey's idea of humanities as different science can be also illustrated by two types of infinities. There is an extensive infinity. It means like a row of figures from 1 to 2 million. That is extensive infinity. But if we have another row of figures, yeah, you know, it is intensive infinity. It is different because it has a certain, well, it is not very.
I misplaced them.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah. So if you divide to the same numbers, you will get a row of numbers which is limited. The same is with geometrical objects. You have a line which is extensive infinity, and you have a circle, and the number of dots here is intensive infinity. So when you go to humanities, you have so-called hermeneutic circle. And Dilthey was a founder of philosophical hermeneutics and semiotics. And the idea was that there is a dimension of depth in this language game, in this hermeneutic circle. So the more you understand your own system of meanings, which is always concrete, the more you understand the whole. And what is more impressive is that the more you can you become able to understand somehow another culture. It is a sort of a mystery which is very similar to what we discussed yesterday about Kozyrev's time and about devices like time waver. So there is a sort of connection, and when you get this experience of understanding more and more the depths of your culture, you develop some quality inside you, which gives you an ability of intercultural, inter-religious understanding. So that's why I feel rather comfortable to talk today not about universal cosmology, universal spirituality, but about concrete problem of Christian religion and its relations to universal science. I feel comfortable especially because I know very little about Vedic tradition. But what I know is that religious tolerance is one of its essential features. And also, it is a very interesting experience as long as I was for many times a participant of interreligious dialogue. It is a growing understanding among scientists that the best podium, the best ground for interreligious dialogue is not a neutral ground. It is when one religion hosts and invites another religion to have a dialogue. And then this dialogue is more efficient and productive. My topic is Christian religion and modern science. And this topic is of crucial importance for understanding of the global megatrends and processes which takes place in our civilization. Our epoch is defined sometimes as postmodern or post-Christian, post-positivist, post and post and post. And these names refer to our problem. We have a long-term crisis of religion in European civilization. We remember how 200 years ago, a little bit less, but approximately, Hegel said that there will be an extinction of religion. And his materialistic followers waited for this death of religion. And yes, institutional Christianity continues to lose its power. But numerous sociological surveys show that it is not so much a growing atheism, but what is called privatization of religious life, or spiritualization of religious life. That is also a possible expression, because the difference between religion and spirituality is widely understood as a difference between institutional and non-institutional type of spiritual life. So it is the loss of the authority of the church, and it is in the big deal, in my view, explained by the inability of the modern church to face the new challenges and to write good answers for the anxieties of the new generation. So it doesn't mean at all that this temporal perplexity doesn't mean that the potential, ethical and theological potential of Christianity is exhausted. So when we have a crisis of religion, it is older, but now we are more and more aware about the crisis of science. And the positivist ideas and expectations that religion will disappear turned to their own. Positivism disappeared itself. We live in a post-positivist epoch. And even in the Soviet Union, with its ideological, anti-bourgeois philosophical ideas, they had to admit at the late 70s the arrival of a new epistemological situation. The essential features of this new situation is the rehabilitation of metaphysics, of irrationality, of mysticism, attention to the personal dimension in cognition, admission of a shortage of science to face main human needs and problems. This mutual crisis of science and religions calls for a reflection on the relations between the two, between these two dominant forces which led European society for centuries. I approach this topic with intention to question the widely spread notion of the struggle between the two and to underline the complementary element in these relations. In fact, in the human history, we had two scientific revolutions, two peaks of very rapid changes, progressive changes in our vision of the world. One was in the 6th century before Christ, and it happened in the ancient Greece. And the second was in the 16th century in Europe. And of course, we shouldn't overlook the political, social, and cultural background of these events, which obviously stimulated them. And it is especially important task because today we also see a considerable change of the character of science. Dramatic transformation of the very basics of scientific activity. It is not only the growing commercialization of science, it's short-term planning, its dependence on immediate technical effect. It is also the disturbing indifference of scientific schools toward universal coordination of basic theoretical assumptions. Science is not united anymore as it was 2 or 3 centuries ago. It is more scattered and more esoteric. More advanced and active teams of scholars don't show any interest in matching their findings with the findings of other groups. Debates of the principal theoretical premises or conclusions, which were common for the time of scholasticism, occur today very rare. Even more rare is the practice of inter-laboratory verification of empirical results. So from social perspective, our science returns to medieval times. And this return encourages revisions of traditionally negative evaluation of the role of church in the great scientific revolution of 16th, 17th century. Maybe science needs some meta-scientific ideological pillar or pivot in order to be universal. And so if we talk today that we are dissatisfied with the mechanicism of the old science, of the modern science, and we look for some other science for the postmodern age, we also, in order to it to be universal, should look for another, let's say, ideological pillar, which will be a core or uniting scientific schools around. Many valuable observations were made in the interconnection between deism and mechanicism of European science. In my presentation, I'm going to dwell a little bit more on this affinity between Christianity and modern science. And I believe it may be helpful in speculating about the possible and desirable future pivot that could stimulate our further way on the road toward holistic science, as it is different from mechanistic science of the past. As a theorist of religious education, I often refer to a scheme depicting shifts or changes of paradigms in the history of education. And I will try to reproduce shortly this scheme. There is an obvious question of the source of knowledge. And there are two principal answers to it that divide our cognitive field, the field of the ways of cognition. Here, we can say that there is a field which corresponds to the idea of revelation or of external source of knowledge which is above human being. So, transcendental source of knowledge. And on the other hand, we have an immanent source of knowledge which comes from experience. And in these terms, often the story of scientific revolution is described. We had this type of way from scholasticism, which was based heavily on the revelation, to the empiricism. And later empiricism grew into positivism. The idea that the only true source of knowledge can be our universal experience with the outer world. But it is not the only line, and it will be not sufficient to understand the development of paradigms in the history, at least in the history of education. So there is another line which divides the preferential object of study. Where is the deepest truth to be found? In the outer world or in the inner world? And here we have also two different situations. Here is an idea which was so vividly expressed in existentialism, that philosophy shouldn't deal with the outer world, that the most important reality is the inner world of people. So against positivism, existentialism came, and it was the beginning with the Kierkegaard, who said that truth is subjectivity. It had a very serious methodological consequences of coming from the objectivism, like the main method of the science of modernity, of positivistic science, toward the participating knowledge, and toward other types of cognition, which are usual for humanities. So here we have Naturwissenschaft, here we have Geistwissenschaft. In this half of the scheme, there is also a distinction like this. One Russian theologian, Vladimir Losky, proposed a good idea to oppose mystical religion and dogmatic religion. He said that the problem of Christianity is that these two became separated. And in fact, from the mainstream in the Orthodox theology, these two should be always go together. In our scheme, of course, mysticism as the knowledge about God, which is deeply connected with our inner world, corresponds to the humanities. And the history of education can be described in a movement like this. And maybe this turn can be associated with the shift from modern science and modern education to the postmodern science and postmodern education. And maybe mysticism is something which is ahead of us if we really have this circular movement. I would like to discuss this scheme and ideas. How does it correspond and resonate with the people coming from another religious traditions? So in a sense, my presentation is also a test about if universal spirituality exists. So when we talk about differences in really absolutely incompatible understanding of what is education, what is the man, what is our task to make man more perfect personality, these differences are not only about church-based education and science-based education. And in order to emphasize in order to acquire a humanitarian style of teaching religion, it means to oppose not only scholastic tradition of catechism, but also a tradition of scientific objectivism, since in both of them religion has been present in the form of objective, formalized truths. Indeed, while praising personality, enlightenment at the same time made human subjectivity an outlaw in cognition. Moreover, liberal education of 18th, 19th century, while trying to get rid of metaphysics, dogmatism, and indoctrination, unconsciously kept stick to the features of scholasticism. The main example here is not only catechetical instruction, which gives certain answers to each question, final and closed knowledge, but also the idea to give students comprehensive corpus of knowledge. So the project of scholasticism was inspired by the idea to have a complete, comprehensive complex of knowledge about God, about ourselves, about nature. And this idea was inherited by Enlightenment. We know, everybody knows that there was a movement of encyclopedists. Denis Diderot, Buffon, Robinet, these French thinkers were practically trying to collect this encyclopedical corpus of knowledge. One Russian philosopher and pedagogue, Vasily Rozanov, said very wise things that before revolution, he blamed official catechetical instruction for making students the atrophy of the religious feeling. And he found the reason for that. He said that the religious teachers, who were mostly priests at that time, perceived their subject as science and tried to teach it in the scientific manner. I think it is also a German problem. At least once I met one boy from Germany and I asked him, how did you enjoy your religious education in school? And he said that, well, it was terrible because we had to memorize definitions. Who is the angel? What is the Eucharist, and so on and so on. So it is a typically scientific approach to religion. Projected to our topic, it means that when we oppose religion and science in European historical context, we should not overlook the succession connecting even anti-cleric scientific movements with the clerical scholastic project. The ideal of comprehensive, verified, and formalized knowledge about the world is not the invention of Enlightenment. It was inherited from the late medieval universities, where science was the maidservant of theology. And here we come to the point of notorious dogmatism and authoritarianness of Christian religion. Again, for a long time, it was usual to oppose science and religion on the point of dogmatism. But on the premises on the post-positivist epistemology, this opposition is not sustainable anymore. I will not tell about very famous figures like Michael Polanyi with his book Personal Knowledge, or about Thomas Kuhn with his book The Structure of Scientific Revolutions. Both these books appeared in the 60s, so more than 50 years ago. And the main idea of the books was that science is a profoundly dogmatic branch of discovery. Thomas Kuhn even said that science in its normal situation doesn't look for new knowledge. Moreover, it is very hostile to any new knowledge, because the main task of the science, like for the bees around their home, is to protect paradigm. But it is also an old story. David Hume, the famous skeptics in England in the middle of 18th century, scoffed scientists for their belief in irregularity. If sun rises every day, doesn't mean it will rise tomorrow. And if you think differently, you build the body of science on your own opinion, and you are a dogmatist, because you are taking critically the fact of repetition and put it into the dogma of regularity. So the opposite side of the coin is of this mistake is the arrogance of scientists studying nature over theologians and humanity scientists, wider, all those who study spiritual world or spiritual matters. From positivist point of view, while the former, the natural scientists, study objective facts and come to reliable truths, the latter, humanity scientists, theologians, artists, study the game of imagination and sink in the mire of subjective opinions. This vision is also not sustainable, and the new understanding came with the accumulation of knowledge. A famous researcher of primitive cultures, Edward Tyler, expressed bluntly this new vision. As truth may be more improbable than imagination, so myth may be more regular than real history. A little bit later, Russian theologian Sergei Bulgakov wrote, "The main experience of religion, that is, encounter with God, possesses such a convincing power that surpasses any other type of evidence. If people of faith started to tell about it, there would appear a mountain that would bury under it the little hill of skeptical rationalism." This image echoes in the words of the famous English apologist of Christianity, Gilbert Keith Chesterton, who was and still is very popular in Russia. He wrote that one could fill the British Museum with evidences uttered by peasants in favor of existence of ghosts. If you reject it, Chesterton says, you can only mean one of two things. You reject it either because the man is a peasant or because the story is the ghost story. You have a perfect right to do so, but you are a dogmatist in this case. This testimony of two Christian apologists draws attention to the important fact that religious dogmatism is a way of generalization and formalization of experience. And as such, it doesn't differ much from scientific theoretization. There are clear indications of this empirical basis of dogma in Christian history. First Ecumenical Council refused Arian teaching not because it was not rational enough. On the contrary, its thorough conceptual coherence exceeded the Trinitarian concept. But fathers of the council found it not congruent with the communal experience of the church. and preferred the concept highly problematic logically, but more adequate empirically. So axiomatics lying behind conventionality was based on shared practical knowledge and experience, exactly as it is with the Euclidean geometry or Galilean mechanics. In fact, elaboration of dogmatic system followed the route depicted by Popper's evolutionary epistemology. Karl Popper put it in this way. So first comes a problem in science. Then comes a tentative solution of it, or probe solution, hypothesis. Then comes its verification and what he called error elimination. But after that, it goes not through knowledge, but it goes to the next problem, which obviously occur after we go deeper into the subject. So that was actually the story of ecumenical councils. Then a new problem when the Trinitarian dogma was established, it raised the problem of divinity of Christ, which led to the violent Christological discussions at further councils. Here again, new dogma was tested against church experience, but also against previous doctrinal elements of the system for the purpose of inner coherence of the system. Maxime the Confessor's idea of applying the willing or the will of a man not to a person but to a nature, very strange idea, was finally accepted by the Sixth Council. And it came exactly as an attempt to adjust the idea of two wills to Trinitarian doctrine. And then the same appeared in the iconoclastic controversy. And you can see these attempts to make the dogmatic system coherent. If so, the project of dogmatization fulfilled by ancient church should be regarded not as a surrender to rationality, or surrender of rationality to the blind faith or external authority, but as a daring and creative breakthrough of mind into the realm of mystery. It was an attempt to reconcile paradoxes of faith with mind. Using a definition applied to the natural science, so natural science is defined sometimes as the knowledge most reliable in its content and most systematic in its expression. I don't see the difference between if we apply this definition to the dogmatic teaching of the Church. It is also necessary to notice that theology in its scholastic project turned out to be much more modest in claims and ambitions than its scientific brood. Fallibilism of Popper and Quine was undoubtedly a very positive step toward this clash of old skepticism on the one side and blind faith or blind devotion to science on the other sense. It came to the more constructive criticism of science. It marked an achievement of more matured and more productive position. But theology opened these horizons centuries years ago, just at the beginning of Trinitarian discussions, when cataphatic theology, or theology of names, was recognized as inferior to apophatic, but still legitimate and useful form of cognition. The main the human being is a measure of all things. This is the famous saying by Protagoras. For modern physics, opportunity to test this principle in practice came only recently after the discovery of quantum effects. As Heisenberg described it in his book, we walked away in Copenhagen with Niels Bohr and talked and talked. How can we reconcile our logic, our mind, with this crazy nature, how it appeared to be? A famous physicist Weizsäcker said, nature was before man, but man was before natural science. And Heisenberg interpreted this phrase as an explanation why we can't get rid of classical conceptualization, despite of our empirical knowledge shows that it is not true, it is not adequate. But we cannot rid of it. In the same way, we can say that God was before man, but man was before theology. That's why theology can't get rid of anthropomorphisms and other conventional expressions, distorting our perception of God, and admittedly fallible, but useful in pragmatic terms. This common strategy of approaching hidden reality through systematic categorization is just one example of the multi-faced implicit methodological affinity between Christian theology and scientific project of modernity. Ilya Prigozhin laid a question why scientific revolution happened in Europe and not in China, so fruitful in practical inventions and theoretical findings. And he answered that it is the issue of power. Unlike Chinese looking more for harmony with nature than for power of nature, European man always wanted to conquer nature. After Bacon declared Wissen ist Macht, science began to be considered as the main instrument of subordinating nature. Behind this desire, there were evident religious motives, as well as activated by Reformation. It is like French saying cherchez la femme, we can say that cherchez la religion behind any scientific movements. So, of course, it was the Reformation that stimulated the development of science. Daniel Defoe's book, Robinson Crusoe, was a manifesto of modern age. The man is left alone on this earth, and it is his task to settle down. This was a deistic idea that generated others, less pious and more presumptuous views on human relations with nature. When I was a schoolboy in the Soviet time, we had a slogan in our classroom of biology. It belonged to a rather famous Russian scientist, Timiryazev. It was said, we shouldn't wait for charity from nature. Our task is to get it ourselves. So this aggressive and conquering attitude toward nature is a part of our religious heritage. The phenomenon of European science is tightly connected with the Christian anthropology, emphasizing separation of man from nature. In order to study somebody or something objectively, you should be free from empathy with it, or with him, with her. It is what Christianity allowed to be. God-likeness of man is preached by dharmic religions as well. But in these religions, God itself is not separated from nature, so strictly as it is separated in Abrahamic religions. Berdyaev clearly refers to this argument in his contemplations on science. He fairly points to the fact that science originated in magic, but what made them diverge, magic and science, was a quality of relations to nature. Magic, I quote Berdyaev, magic is a communication with nature. For magic, nature is always animated, so it addresses not mechanical forces, but living spirits. Christianity exorcised demons from nature. The man could not take power over nature inhabited by spiritual beings. So science and technique are offsprings of Christian liberation. Here one can find the resolution of one more apparent paradox. Why so many European scientists, being pious and devoted Christians, made substantial contributions to the development of materialistic outlook. For me, as a Russian, the most vivid experience is Ivan Pavlov, who developed a very materialistic theory on the behavior, but he was a very pious man, and he was an elder of one of the Orthodox parishes. Here, and by the way, he was educated in a monastery. Here we can find the resolution, So it is very similar to the question why Descartes, also a idealist at least, invented the idea of reflexes. But the reason is very simple. It is a strict dualism. If you cannot place unconscious element of psychological life inside the realm of the spiritual. You look how to explain it in mechanical terms. And if you divided the whole nature from the realm of the spirit, you are free to treat it on the same premises as dead technical device. I must mention here that this dualistic approach is not the only possible within Christianity. At least in the Orthodoxy, we have a theological streams developing milder visions of the separation between Creator and His creation. Yesterday we also talked a little bit about Russian cosmism, and it is about this movement. Russian sociologist Sergei Bulgakov definitely preached a substantial identity of nature and God. Nature for him is a divine substance outside God. Remarkably, when he was brought to the church court for this consideration of this topic, his teaching was recognized heretical only by one part of the splitted church at that time. So a big part of the church agreed with this. And this is not accidental, that this stream of theology is inseparably connected with the Russian cosmism. So theology obviously inspires and promotes specific scientific inquiry oriented to more holistic vision of nature as a living thing. And this is, of course, very interesting perspective also in terms of bridging Western and Eastern parts of the world. There is one more deeper dimension in the affinity we talk about. I dare to guess that motivation to study nature and to open hidden laws which govern or rule this nature wouldn't be so strong if Christianity did not advocate the idea of uniqueness of creation. The idea itself is strictly connected with the doctrine of incarnation of God in Jesus Christ. Apostle Paul in his epistle to Romans says that God's invisible attributes are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made. So the idea to look into nature in order to find God is not alien to Christian mind, despite the previously discussed points. One can see here another paradox, but it is not a paradox. There is no contradiction, because nature still may be regarded as a dead body bearing imprint of its creator, like an old stone may bear an imprint of an extinct animal. The question of how much of God's living glory still fills the universe is a matter of theological controversy. And again, in fact, it is the main topic which divides Western and Eastern Christian spirituality. To believe in embodiment and resurrection of Christ, as supposed by gospel, it means automatically to profess the uniqueness of historical existence. Orthodox theologians used to say that to be real Christian means to believe not only in the reality of all these mysterious events, but also in the reality of the world around. A scientist trying this earthly matter in his laboratory reminds Thomas Apostle, who didn't admit resurrection until he put his fingers into the wound of Christ. From theological point of view, he becomes a witness who certifies that the flesh of this world does exist. So the scientist, trying nature, he certifies that the world exists. And his experience as a scientist is much deeper and much more convincing than our common, usual experience of this world. It is of existential importance of being a scientist. Maybe this observation is applicable to a wider range of religions. A famous neo-Thomist Jacques Maritain developed an original phenomenological theory. You know, phenomenological theories of religion try to deal with religion usually as it is proposed here, as universal thing. So phenomenologists try to find a universal reason why people are religious. So Jacques Maritain proposed that the religion is based on this particular insight into the existence of the world as something which is not dependent on us. Anyhow, theology and science are on one side in this issue, both distancing themselves from mythological consciousness through more serious attitude toward the material world. I don't have much time to speak, but I wanted to also draw some parallels between science and religion in terms of their mutual enrichment. It is mutual benefit which comes to religion from science and to science from religion. I will not say much about the role of scholasticism in the more concrete terms. We know that the paradoxical thinking, which was so brilliantly represented by Nikolai Rem, by Jacques Buridan, by Nikolai Kuzansky, by Blaise Pascal. So all this school of paradoxical thinking came out of the reflections on the idea of infinity of God. And it made a great contribution into the development of mathematics and physics. I also can say that it is very interesting that the idea of Trinity becomes more and more universal issue. There is a growing number of followers of so-called Trinitarian logics, which is alternative to binaric logic. And it is interconfessional, interreligious topic. I met, for instance, Jewish philosophers who are very active in developing their Trinitarian philosophy. Well, scientific discoveries also on their side contribute to development of religion. And I guess not only to Christianity, but universally. I used to divide two functions of science, and I called them referential and rectifying functions. What is referential function? Natural science provides theology with the priceless illustrative material to serve as reference for theological concepts. The analogy between earthly and heavenly things was among the main means of theological expression from the beginning of Christianity. References to seeds and the sower, to cultivation, harvesting, grafting, and other agricultural realities fill the scripture. Fathers of the Council took up this approach and put their paradoxical dogmas into the garments of physical phenomena. As, for instance, the Trinitarian dogma was expressed in the image of sun, which sent the warmth and light to the earth. Or Christological dogma was expressed in the image of red-hot sword that combines properties of iron and fire. Quite obviously, these analogies were very vulnerable and led to improper simplifications. The first analogy didn't reflect at all the idea of the sameness of three hypostases. And the second analogy with the sword, encouraged a false idea that the human nature of Christ was saturated by the divine nature only partly. Like the hot sword only partly exhibits properties of fire and doesn't acquire other properties, such as permeability of the fire. And these analogies were not convincing enough for critical minds to recognize them reconcilable with scientific knowledge. And how much more convincing would be an analogy based on the current knowledge about nature? The ability of white light to carry within it the plurality of different colors, is it not a miracle comparable to a Trinitarian mystery? Dualism of elementary particles combining incompatible properties of wave and particle, is it not a wonder reminiscent of the centuries ago brave decision to allot Christ with two incompatible natures? While climbing up, and the science, the contribution of science can be, imagined as the safety hooks in the wall of the theology. So while climbing up with the help of science, cataphatic theology automatically elevates the level of apophatic theology. And this is what I call a rectifying function, the second function of science. Our great writer, Anton Chekhov, depicted once a human ignorance in the image of a countryman who wrote the letter to his neighbor. The neighbor was an astronomer, And this man was very nervous about astronomical knowledge. He argued against the idea of sunspots, for instance. And he put his arguments in the very remarkable way, as Chekhov reproduced it. You claimed in your clever article that there are black spots on the greatest heavenly body, namely on the sun. I must tell you that it can't be so, because it can't be so whatsoever. So in the course of the development of science, arguments like these are less and less possible. They are permanently reduced by, and automatically the content of apathetic reasoning is increasing. God appears again and again not what we supposed him to be. Formal criteria of truth are not exclusively a prioristic, as Kant suggested, and the development of science make them more flexible. It is more and more difficult to find things that can be regarded as unimaginable, even in the realm of material things. Reality expands, and it may mean that God becomes more distant to us, but it also means that we will not mix him up with earthly things, and our theological reasoning becomes refined in this course. Today we will not be satisfied with the argument of Luther that Copernicus was wrong because birds could not fly against the rotating earth. And we will not only be satisfied with the Voltairean disproof of the story of creation by reference to the impossibility of light without luminaries. It may be taken as a paradox of natural science that is repeated over and over in history, that it deliberately removes God from the picture of the world in order to find it finally in this picture. Heisenberg expressed it in his famous example. He said that the first sip from the jar of science leads to atheism, but God is waiting for us at the bottom of the jar. Thank you.